Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Global Conversations. My name is Andre Darmanin. If you already know who I am, great. If not, welcome. So today's topic is going to be psychological safety in the global context. And to put this in context, through the pandemic, awareness of mental health in the workplace has been prominent. Creating a psychologically safe environment became part of EDI strategies in organizations worldwide. The global diversity practice called it the new yardstick for inclusion. And that includes speak up culture, taking risks, etc. And those are some of the ways to encourage it. So a study from Ju Yoon and Galbraith state that organizational trust and empowering leadership accounted for 68% of the variance of employees' psychological safety. While Amy Edmondson perfected the concept of psychological safety, the term was first introduced in the 60s. So my guest, Lisa Ferrol from Bagamoyo Consulting, will highlight psychological safety in a global context, and talking about the risks, negative outcomes, and how we can encourage an environment of trust in our organizations. So welcome, Lisa.
Hey, Andre, it's great to be with you. Great that we're finally having this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's interesting how we started interacting with each other. I believe it was one of the inclusion conferences sometime last year where we met. And then when I was floating the idea of psychological safety, you had actually, I believe it was one of our cohorts, our colleagues, Sami Ben Ali, who said, "Hey, Lisa's a perfect person for this webcast." And so, we connected afterwards, had a conversation, and it was like, we hit it off perfectly. So,
yeah.
and at the same time, as I've been following your journey on social media, seeing, jealous of your travel pics, uh, and it's like, here we are, here's you in Dubai and you in some other vacation spot. And I'm like, why can't I be just like her right now? But I say at some point, I'll get there. But thank you for this, Lisa. So, for the audience themselves, tell us about yourself, talk about your journey, and, how did Bagamoyo Consulting come to be?
Yeah, thanks very much. So Bagamoyo is around just over a year old now, and I got the opportunity to set myself up in business following redundancy. So I've been working in the organizational development space for around about 25 years, I guess, and latterly my position was as president for culture and inclusion with Wood PLC, so a big engineering organization, global. They were in around 60 countries, and I was leading diversity, equity and inclusion for them just before I left. But sadly that position was made redundant, but going out on my own was probably something that was always in the back of my head. I think when you get to a certain point in your career, you're thinking, well, what's the next natural step? And I think for me, consulting was just that. I got to a place where I'd been in that organization for 10 years. I think sometimes you can get a little bit jaded when you've been in an organization for that long. And I started to think about, well, is there an opportunity for me to do this work, but do it with more people, do it with more organizations? And I had that ambition that I'd start to maybe do it with smaller companies as well, because I think that, people maybe think that this topic is something that's really only for the big, global multinationals. But I firmly believe that this is something that you really have to take into all organizations. And I think when we get into the conversation of psychological safety, it doesn't matter what size of organization you are, that really needs to be there if you want to have this people approach to your leadership. So it's pretty exciting. It's been a little bit daunting, I guess, being out on your own and you've got to win the work and then you've got to follow through on the work. But I've loved it. I've absolutely loved it because I'm dealing with so many different people. And I think the other thing that I've found out is that I appreciate the generosity of the network, particularly on LinkedIn. You've got to work harder. I think it's staying connected with people and reaching out. And you and I had a great conversation when we first met. And I tend to do that a lot more now that I'm actually in my own business, because I'm more curious. I want to learn from people.
Mhm.
So that's been a lot of fun as well.
No, and besides the whole, joking aside about your journeys and
I
your
don't go on holiday
travels.
all the time, Andre.
Oh,
Promise you I
come
don't.
on, come on. Trust me, go follow Lisa. You'll see her on Instagram, and you'll see her pics. It's almost like, anyway, we're jealous. I'm jealous. But anyway, besides the point. So going back to your LinkedIn for a minute, it's like, even noticing your presence on LinkedIn where you talk about your personal journeys or your personal situations you related to EDI
Mm,
work. And that's something that's even part of that psychological safety, being authentic with who you are, right? Because
yeah.
a lot of organizations, I just saw an article, I think it was in Harvard Business Review, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, about being authentic has been much more difficult in this day and age. And there's a lot of organizational leaders who say that, yes, you be yourself, you be authentic, but yet authentic leadership doesn't happen because of certain egos or certain personalities, etc. So
Mm,
I mean, even with that, that plays a big part in psychological safety, right?
oh yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure you agree with that.
Oh, 100%. And actually, do you know what? It was the thing I probably focused the most on when I was in my corporate role, because sometimes I felt there was a lack of authentic leadership, and I felt that it was necessary for me to play that vulnerable role for the organization. So for anyone that was following me who wanted to kind of get involved in DEI in the organization, it was always necessary for me to be vulnerable. I'm probably a constant oversharer, so anyone that follows me on LinkedIn will probably know that. But I genuinely believe that you can do better, that you can connect with people on that human level. And I think that if you're able to tell a story and bring your personal experiences to bear, it gives permission for other people to do the same. And you never know who's going to read. You never know who needs to hear that message at that point in time. So I think for me, it's a foundation of psychological safety, is that you're able to be vulnerable, to be authentic. And I think that goes a long way to creating that safe space for people.
And so let's backtrack for a minute. So, a lot of people don't really know I wouldn't say don't know, but don't really understand what psychological safety is.
Yeah.
So for the audience out there who are just starting their professions in as EDI professionals,
Yeah.
or even leaders who are not immersed in that EDI space, in your summarize in your words, what do you think is needed? Well, first of all, what is psychological safety,
Yeah.
and what is needed, and what are the components you think of what psychological safety is all about?
Yeah. So I guess in its most simplest terms, I think it's about creating an environment where everybody feels safe to speak up without kind of that fear of consequence of being shut down. I think there's maybe a misconception that it's a scenario that allows you to say whatever you want. I think
Yeah.
we've got to be clear that there are still boundaries. I think within an organisation, there's boundaries within everything. I think even psychological safety exists in the family, in the home.
Mhm.
Is that how you talk to one another. I think at its core, it's about communication, it's about active listening. And I think it's actually around being respectful of one another. I think that we need to focus on the fact that we are all uniquely different. We've all got a story to tell. Um, and psychological safety allows us to be those people. So I think that, for me, it's about ensuring that there's no judgment, if at all
Mhm.
possible. And I think, and this maybe take us slightly down a different conversation, and so you can pull me back if you want to, but
Mhm.
for me, judgment is at the key of a lot of the work that we do. And I think that psychological safety should provide an environment where we are able to talk about absolutely anything. And that means that we might talk about things that we vehemently disagree about. And I actually think that that's healthy. I actively will go out and seek people that can give me support, so I think that psychological safety needs to happen when you're a leader and you're creating that for your team. But I think that when you're an EDI practitioner as well, you have to find that with peers. And so I will actively seek out, depending on where I am in my cycle of thought process, I will go and seek affirmation from somebody. I'll go and find, okay, I'm thinking about this is how I feel. And that tends to be Sammy, by the way, because we always bounce off each other in terms of, what are you thinking about this particular topic? But then I also have to push myself to think critically. And I think, we'll maybe talk about critical thinking a little later on, is that I have to then go and find somebody that I know absolutely despises everything that I work on and thinks it's completely nonsense. And I'll go and test something with them because, then I know that I'm going to get all sides of a situation. So again, it's built on trust, having those good relationships with people where you're willing to debate, discuss, but you know that you're not going to have a massive argument about it. You're not going to be disrespectful to one another, and you're not going to hurt each other in the process, I think, is probably how I would characterize it.
Yeah, no, that's a great topic to expand on, because of the fact that it's important for us to be in a safe environment where we are able to have our views in a professional setting, right? And more so in the sense of there's going to be differing opinions within a workplace, right? Not everyone's going to agree with everything. Yes, you want to have that confirmation bias just to gain just to affirm what you're saying or what you're doing.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, it's like, okay, there's going to be people out there who's going to say, look, I don't like this idea. But at some point, you're gonna come to an agreement on how to do things better, because maybe you'll learn from somebody else. And I think that's part of that psychological safety aspect of this. And then speaking of differing opinions here, now let's go to your former workplace, Wood. It's a global organization, given that. And so where there's cultural differences in how they approach things, and now combined with the hybrid workplace, that brings a new set of challenges together. So, from your time working at Wood, and now even now working with smaller organizations who could be localized, who could be global, or have a global context, what do you think the differences are with a global context versus a local context when approaching psychological safety? I mean, some of them could be the same, some of them could be different, but I think there's a lot more. So, I mean, from your experience, what have you come across?
Yeah, so I'll definitely relate back to Wood, but I've had the opportunity over the course of my career to work for a couple of global organizations, so I'll probably reference those as well. So I think it definitely can be different, for sure, in different cultures. Because naturally the values, the beliefs, the norms that exist within a country mean that people are going to perceive what psychological safety is, differently. So I think, when you think about, collectivist cultures, maybe from an Asian or an African perspective, is that you definitely see more of that group conformity and the desire for harmony. And so there probably won't be quite such a big speak up culture. And I know that we came across that when we were delivering some conscious inclusion webinars. We used an example of one that we were aware of when we were working in West Africa, it was, whereby there had been a safety incident, and the team, the dynamic was that there was Western senior managers. I think they were UK Western managers who were running the site, but it was a largely local workforce. And they knew that there was an issue from a safety perspective, but they didn't feel that it was okay for them to speak up. And even with the most strong safety culture, where we know that, if something's going wrong, that you can stop the job, etc., they just didn't feel that that was going to be acceptable to do so. So again, just that harmony of not wanting to rock the boat. It's not acceptable to speak up to a senior manager, etc. You definitely see that psychological safety is just perceived in a different way. And then if you take that back to, for us, in the UK, for you in Canada, is that, it's much more individualistic, and you'd expect it is that people are used to speaking up, speaking their mind. And so I think that perhaps in essence, it should be easier to establish psychological safety in those particular situations. But then that's where the difference stops, I think, is that I think that with a focus on leadership development, having clear expectations on what a leader does within an organization, that the inclusive behaviors that need to be there, I think you can actually transcend the cultures a little bit. And if you focus in on having the cultural agility to understand who your teams are, what the different perspectives are, then I think that's when you can get to a much better place, whereby you set the expectation that you can speak up. I expect you to. You ask for feedback on a regular basis. You're the leader who speaks last, to enable that everybody else is able to give their points of view on a particular topic. I think that's when you can start to establish psychological safety, irrespective of that kind of cultural nuance.
And so, going back to where we are, in the environment that we're in now with this, the hybrid workplace, and do you think that the aspect of psychological safety has been more pronounced in the workplace? I mean, I mentioned it at the outset, but in your thought, has it been more pronounced in the workplace, whether people are returning back to work, or even in a hybrid environment? Like, do you find that there's been differences pre-COVID and post-COVID with psychological safety?
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot, actually, because I think that it was better during COVID. And the reason I say that is that somehow we all just became human and we became equal. We were all going through the same situation with regards to the pandemic. We all had to work really quickly to be able to establish ourselves at home. Life was getting in the way. We had our kids running in, the dogs, everything was happening. And somehow we all started to see each other a little bit differently. And I saw the trust started to be established a lot more easily. It was a given. I think as we move back into a hybrid environment, or where we're starting to see organizations demand that the people go back into the office, I feel that psychological contract is being broken a little bit more. And so I think it's become harder to reestablish that psychological safety, because trust is, it's not a given anymore. You have to earn it. And I think that, people are being checked up upon, is there light green? Is it red? I feel that there's definitely that we've stepped backwards, I think, in that space. So I think that, again, it's a call on leaders that they have to maybe look at the way that they're approaching things. And I often wonder that, the call to get people back into the office, what is the actual driver for that? And it's maybe unfair, but I think sometimes it's lazy leadership, because I think it's much easier if you've got somebody in the office with you, you feel that you're able to manage the situation a little bit better. But will you trust somebody who's not there? And I think that becomes a cultural aspect of your organization, as to whether you need to micromanage in an office versus focus on the output that a team is having for you.
Yeah, and that's an interesting segue, because of the fact that the number one driver, I believe, is for people being forced back into the office is real estate. It's all about money, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to lose the real estate. They don't want to look. They want to, they say, oh, it's because of collaboration, and then you're starting to see. I remember we were everyone wanted to go back to the office for having fun, they have these little events to create camaraderie and stuff. And then that kind of went away. Then COVID happened. And now people some organizations, I'm seeing them on LinkedIn. It's like, come back to the office and let's create that environment of collaboration and fun so we can be together. But so they're trying to soften the blow of them demanding people to come back to the office. I think that's what it really is. But at the same time, there's going to be people, like you said, who are on camera. Maybe something's going on in the background, and it's like they don't want to be on camera, or they don't want to be disturbed. But managers are still going to sit there and wonder, or not even so much wonder. It's going to be like, hey, why is this person not showing up on camera? Do they have the awareness to provide that distance between what someone is going through versus, someone who's joyous and happy, or, being in
Yeah.
a different headspace, right? So these are the questions that I have in terms of, you know, is a leader really adept to understand what a psychologically safe environment really is? And I don't know if
Mm.
they're up to par with that, from at least from what I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm not painting a brush on every single leader, but you know, are there going to, I don't see courses on this, or even people who are going out and doing this kind of work on their own to say, how can I make this a better environment for my organization as a leader, or even as a middle manager, right? And
Mm.
I think middle managers are the ones who are, at least from my thinking, that they're not really fully immersed in this topic. So I
Yeah.
mean, what are I'm sure you've experienced that in one way or another.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about. Is that one, when you talked about that kind of forcing people to switch on their cameras, etc. I always think of that as being the most non-inclusive act that you can you can potentially have, is because you don't really
Mhm.
know what's going on for someone. And I remember for myself, I was in a team meeting and I had my camera switched off, and I'd already told my leader why my camera wasn't off, and it was because I'd had to put my cat down that day, and I was
Mm,
just an absolute mess. My eyes were as puffy as anything. I was crying my eyes out, and I didn't want the rest of the team to see me looking like I did. So I'd
mhm,
let her know. She says, "Of course, no, I totally understand that." And then I remember a colleague, a peer on my team, started to call me out as to why my camera wasn't on. And I'd already made a statement on the chat to say, listen, team, I really don't want to have my camera on today, but they kept on pushing it. So eventually I just ended up having to do a side conversation and say, here's the reason why I don't want to put my camera on. I hope you'll appreciate that. And they felt really bad afterwards, of course. And for
mm,
me, it's a learning, opportunity always to say, look, think first about what might be going on for the other person before you then step in and demand something to happen. So for me, leaders, I think, are doing the best they can. I always want to
mhm,
assume that they're doing the best that they can.
mhm,
And if they're not doing the best that you think they can, then it's because there's a gap in some sort of way in their capability. So I
mhm,
think that the answer for that is, we need to do better when it comes to promoting what inclusive behavior, inclusive leadership actually looks like. And I'm always wired to think of it as being leading with the heart first and foremost, because there's a belief that we have to treat each other as human beings first and foremost.
mhm,
And I think that you have to spend the time getting to know somebody. I remember with another colleague, he's like, "When I don't really care, whether you've got a dog, I don't care whether you've got a cat, I don't want to have those conversations with you." And this was before my cat died, and it's not the same
mm,
person, but I said to him,
mhm,
says, "Look, but what if my cat did just die today? Don't you want to know that I'm in a bad place?" And for
mhm.
him, it was just that light bulb moment. Is actually, that's why you invest in personal relationships.
Right.
That's why you take the time to actually get to know somebody, what they stand for, what's important to them. Because for the moments that matter, you want to be there for them and recognize, okay, they're going to be a little bit off today. Maybe they're not going to get through their report that I've asked them for.
Mhm,
So I think that having that focus on inclusive leadership, active listening, empathy, understanding, and building trust, those are the skills that I think that we need, on top of just a huge amount of cultural literacy, I think, to
yeah.
what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and as we've been having this conversation, a couple of other things that come to mind is, and you've mentioned it during our talk about, as being an inclusive leader, uh, especially in a global organization, cultural intelligence is a huge factor of understanding, differences. And it's not to say you need to fully be immersed in each culture, but at least have an understanding and an openness
Yeah.
to their cultures, and as well as another part of this, as you've alluded to, is more having the courage to speak up, but having that trust with your colleagues and the leaders that are there to have that open dialogue, to have that uh, the courageous side of things. So I mean, those are a couple factors. Even learning from our conversation, these are the things that are needed, and
Mm,
and some people will go back and say, oh, but wait, I'm a local organization. I don't need to understand cultural intelligence, let's just say. And this is a topic that I've that I've explored a little bit more as I've been doing these webcasts. So I mean, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of I mean, we talked about the courage, but the cultural intelligence side of things, is there anything you want to expand on with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one, I think I would probably challenge that idea that just because you're working in a local context that you don't need cultural intelligence. And the reason I say that is that whilst you may think that you're working within a homogenous group, you don't actually really know that, because
Mhm.
diversity, yes, it's inherent, but it can be acquired, and you don't actually know what's going on within your team. So you might all look as though you're homogenous, but the reality is that that might not be the case. And I think, if you look at that through the lens of neurodiversity as well, and kind of looking at it from that point of view, then you're pretty certainly not going to be a homogenous group. So it depends on how you look at it. You're talking about cultural or racial homogeneity or whatever you look at. But for me, I don't think that there truly is a homogenous group in play in most leadership teams.
Yeah.
So I think that from that point of view there's always a need for curiosity. And I think those skills, of having the active listening, of asking the questions, of building the trust are going to be strong leadership skills as well. But I think there are other things going on there, is that if we want to tap into really great talent across the world, and we're talking more about hybrid remote working, a team member might not even be within your vicinity, but they're still part of your local organization. We're such a hyper connected world these days that, again, you have to really take the time to really understand what's going on in the world and have those conversations. So I think that I still think that cultural intelligence is absolutely necessary. And then I think about, particularly for countries, I think about the UK. I did a webinar a few weeks ago on religious inclusion in the UK. And we were talking about cultural literacy from the point of view of the changing demographics of the world. So, in 10 years' time, I think one of my guests had told me that it's the population within the UK, 30 or 40% of the UK population will be from a minority background. Therefore, consumers, that are going to look different. The way that businesses approach, how they sell to the market, organizations will look different. We're going to get left behind if we don't actually spend time actually really understanding, the people around us. And I think that, again, that would be just another kind of point to raise the flag for cultural intelligence. And I think that what it also does is it enables critical thinking, I think, if you've got that cultural intelligence. So I think that, it allows you to get that broader context. You're going to look at things from a different perspective, and that can only be a good thing for decision making, I think, It's why I go out and find the people that annoy me so that I can actually have those conversations. And I feel like I'm getting better, and I become better in my practice because I've done the work to actually test my own hypothesis. So I think that's probably something that would be worthwhile doing.
Yeah, no, that is, those are great points. And, even when you've talked about, I thought about it, when we're talking about not just cultural intelligence, but you mentioned that whole neurodiversity aspect. And that's a group that needs even more psychological safety, given the fact that they're, I'm not going to go into any stereotypes of how people perceive them to be, but at the same time, it's like, a neurodiverse population, they have a lot of great talents and skills and whatnot, but the people who are not neurodiverse or neurodivergent fully don't understand them. So I mean, that's another element to psychological safety in my mind, and could bring a diverse team together.
Well, imagine if you don't understand how somebody who might be on the autism spectrum might actually present themselves. If you've got a preconceived idea of what acceptable behavior is within an organization and they don't conform to that, I've seen countless times when, an individual may start to be put on a performance improvement plan because they're deemed to be, not performing and their behavior isn't appropriate, etc., because they haven't felt safe to disclose what's going on for them. A culturally intelligent leader, a curious leader, will probably have started to explore that a little bit more with their teams. And again, from an organizational perspective, when we talk about, putting practices in place, neurodiversity is something that affects a lot more people within the world and the global, population, that if we actually paid attention to that, if we paid attention to disability, we're more likely to create a fairer world for more people. So I think that, treating these things at a systemic, at a policy level within our businesses, can only be a good thing for creating that environment.
No, that you've made a great point on that, and that's something for our leaders, whether you're fully immersed in EDI practices and whatnot, or not. It's something leaders need to fully understand, is that not everyone is going to be like you, and not everyone is going to understand each other, but at the same time, help just be that person to understand who the other person is, because that's part of our networks, right? Like you said, it's a
Yeah.
hyper connected world. It's something that we need to pay greater attention to, and these are things that we need to understand as leaders, and as also as practitioners, because a lot of times what I find is that from a psychological safety perspective or not, a lot of diverse leaders do not think, they only think in silos, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you've got understood, like, not understood it, but just more like, people who are in that space, and they're, they think of just one thing. Maybe it's what they're passionate about or whatnot, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, if you want to be you want to promote a psychologically safe environment as a practitioner, as a leader,
Yeah.
I think it's better to understand everyone's components and the intersectionality of all of them, and that's even the bigger conversation here too.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point, because when I was thinking about, how important psychological safety is, and looking at it through the lens of being a practitioner, I actually think that there's an implicit expectation that we as practitioners are going to practice that, that we will create that safe space for others. And I think we've got a duty of care actually to do that, because we've got to create that environment without judgment. I don't think we collectively as practitioners, and I talk about that as kind of like the whole community of people who are working on that, I actually don't think we're that great at it all of the time.
Yeah, no.
Because I think, I don't see it always in this work. I look at LinkedIn and it can be so polarizing in terms, and when I see like some of the posts that go up there, they're so self-righteous.
Yeah.
And one of my most recent posts was around that concept of being clumsily human. I heard it at the conference that I was at last week, and I just thought, what a perfect term, because we are absolutely clumsily human. And I think that we have to give grace to people. I think that we can't assume that everybody's going to be on our page. The minute that we start preaching about a particular topic or one aspect of an agenda, that's when I think that we do a disservice to the work that we do. So for me, I think it's the biggest part of my practice is to try and stay out of judgment. It's hard. It is so hard. But I think that that's where we can kind of make the biggest improvements. And so that's when, again, back to the critical thinking, is that you have to go in and really test your thoughts on a particular topic before you actually then go and share something. And I'm always looking at, this has to be balanced, always, what I'm trying to say. And then I ask for the call out. Is it the minute I'm becoming self-righteous and going down a preaching route, somebody has to call me out and say, hey, Lisa, do you know what? Think of it from this angle. And I think that's the greatest gift that we as practitioners could give to one another, is to have that dialogue whereby, do you think I'm getting this right? Could I maybe have changed the language a little bit? And that's why I appreciate having a network around me to really enable that practice.
Yeah, and I'm on that train too, especially given the fact that there's that one or maybe two or three people who can check you when you make that kind of comment, because as leaders, we're taught to take a step back, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Now there's a 90-second pause before we make a decision. But at the same time, sometimes our minds are, we want to react to that certain situation. And given the fact that we're in an environment where it's talking about clickbait, or we're talking about other areas. So it's like, how do you, how do you not essentially how do you control yourself, but it's more just like how do you deal with those situations? And I mean, you've raised some great points about that, and that's those are things for us to think about as leaders and as practitioners in this work. So
Yeah.
that's a great segue into talking about the negative side, because at the same time, some people take advantage of the psychological safety aspect, and especially within the global organization. So in your thought, in your ideas and thoughts, are there any misconceptions of psychological safety, risks, negative outcomes, and all that? So what have you encountered, or what do you think the faux pas are?
So I think that when you've got a focus on psychological safety and inclusion, that it probably enables people to think that they can say whatever they want. And I think that that is true to a certain extent. If we're actually being truthful and pure to the concept of psychological safety, we should be able to say whatever we want without any negative consequences. But I think that that is then, you think about an organization where you have policies and practices, and you create a framework in which you determine what is or isn't acceptable. So I remember I think it was when we were just starting to focus on a topic, I think it was race and ethnicity. We would always have this one individual who just didn't believe in the work that we were doing and always promoted the other side, if you like. And I hate using that language because it puts you automatically on a spectrum of right and wrong. But he always shared an alternative perspective that wasn't the majority perspective, let's just say.
Yeah.
But I always was quite proud of that, in the sense because we'd created an environment whereby he felt safe to do so. Now, he wasn't being disrespectful. He was simply sharing something that wasn't a popular view, but it was a wide held view, particularly within, I guess, the US, what he was talking about. But the people within the network absolutely took it personally, and they found it hurtful. And I think that that is the essence of it, is that people may not understand the unintended consequences of what they're saying. So they've got that psychological safe environment, they can speak up, but they don't understand perhaps the hurt that they may be causing to the people who are receiving that comment or kind of opinion. So I think that open communication is almost the mitigation for that, is it being able to have a dialogue about it. I think that that is really, really important, so that you can actually explore in a little bit more detail. And I think it's also why you've got to have some pretty robust policies in place and practices around bullying, harassment, anti-hate speech, etc., in order to make sure that you're not contravening any laws in the jurisdiction that you're operating in. And it's probably one of the reasons why I'm glad that I'm not within a corporation anymore, is because I probably err on the side of, I think it's okay to say whatever you want. If you're truly being that person who's staying out of judgment, everybody has an opportunity to say something, to think something. And the book that I'm reading right now is all about, do you judge somebody on the basis of the worst thing that they've ever done in the past, or can you move through with compassion and understanding? That's the path that I try to follow in my inclusive practice. And I know that that's not for everybody, because I think that a lot of people want to get to a place of right and wrong and kind of say, well, that is completely unacceptable behavior. There's three sides to every story, right? Yours, mine, and the truth. And I think that if you're really practicing inclusion in the purest form, then you can say whatever you want, but there will be consequences to it. I think that's the difference. It's the consequences, it's the follow through. But again, those consequences and follow through, they're essentially laced with judgment. They're laced with right and wrong. But that's the world that we operate in. So I think we just have to get on with that. But I think that it is a difficult path.
Yeah, but I think it's we can overcome it because of the fact, yes, we are we are in a polarized environment as we speak, whether in the UK
Mm,
from just before Brexit until now, with refugees and new immigrants coming to the country, and like you rightly said before, we're experiencing this here in Canada as well,
yeah,
and in the US too, where it's we're there, it's going to be a larger um, global majority population coming into the country, and being part of that, where it's going to be, I believe, 50% by within the next 20 years in the US, and maybe the next 30 to 40 years in Canada.
yeah.
I probably won't be alive to see that, but at the same time, you know, but the thing is, we're starting to see this, and we I can say that both of us come from a generation where there was a middle ground, right?
Mm,
That we can say that, hey, there is a gray area in terms of this. How do we come to a compromise? And I think being in a psychologically safe environment doesn't give people carte blanche to say whatever they want, but rather to have that dialogue, or even have that, as I said earlier, of that 60-second, 90-second pause. If you have that awareness, and I think that's part of that component of psychological safety,
yeah,
that you bring as an individual to an organization, or even in just personal conversations, right?
yeah,
And I think, because of the fact that, oh, we can say whatever we want, or we're in, people don't see who we are, or for people for who we are, that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's just an interesting concept of how there could be bad parts of psychological safety, and people take advantage of it because they think they can say whatever they want.
mm,
But at the same time, we're of the generation of the maturity, the self-awareness, that there are so many different components to the work that we do, in that this is how we need to address our situations from a strategic standpoint. And
yeah,
that's what I think an organization needs to have, is people who think that, not necessarily think along the same way, but think strategically, to understand that, hey, there's different parts of this conversation that need to be had in order for us to make a true decision, whether it's on EDI, whether it's on, certain policies, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. So I guess one of the things that kind of it triggers in my mind is that psychological safety as a concept is inherently judgmental.
Yeah.
Because somebody's deciding that the safe space is there for anybody to say whatever they want, as long as it's in line with a particular policy or a particular
Mhm.
dogma or whatever. If we're being true, um, you can say whatever you want. There is freedom of speech. We should be able
Mhm.
to have an opinion about something, and sadly, some of our institutions are failing in us in that perspective right now. Is that I know that I have the debate constantly at the moment around the media here in the UK, is that we're getting to a point of censorship.
Yeah.
And I think about the World Cup in Qatar, and how the Western society had such an opinion on whether it was appropriate or not about some of their practices, whether that be on
Mhm.
human rights, whether it be LGBT inclusion, etc. And they're quite willing to point the finger over in that country, whereas actually they just need to have a look in the mirror in terms of what's going on in their own in their own country. So I don't want to go down a political conversation, of course, because that will just cause a riot. But I think that that's the whole point, is that psychological safety is inherently judgmental. If we're
Yeah.
really going to go after it, let's be grown up. Let's have conversations that are spicy, that are laden with differing views, etc. But if we deal with it with heart, with good
Sure.
intent, with understanding, with curiosity, we can still disagree with each other at the end of the day, but perhaps we'd be able to say, thanks very much for that conversation. I've learned
Mhm.
something today. I don't
Yeah.
agree with you, but thank you for listening to me, and thank you for telling me things I didn't know. That's how I think that we should be going after it.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's given me pause, and it's also, I'm sure, the audience who's watching or listening, pause, in terms of, how do they, embrace psychological safety, and how do they learn from their own mistakes, and become and have more inclusive behaviors within themselves, and also within the organizations that they work. And and this is a conversation that I've been longing to have and get a better insight into, into how to become a person who embraces that concept and puts that into perspective in terms of my leadership capabilities or influencing other people who want to learn to become leaders, or just not even necessarily leader by title, but have those leadership characteristics in that perspective. And this was a great conversation. I enjoyed it very immensely, and I'm happy to have had you as part of this. So in conclusion, I just want to let you have the floor in terms of where people can find you, any other thoughts that you want to add in closing, et cetera. So I mean, I'll leave it to you in terms of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, first of all, it's been really great to have the conversation with you. It's always good to kind of be prompted to dig deep on a conversation, on a topic, and kind of find your voice on it. So that's been really lovely to do that. So in terms, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me, Lisa Ferrol on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to post most of my content. My website's bagamoyoconsulting.com, and some of my articles go up on there. So I guess, any final thoughts from me is that I think that if anyone wants to kind of get better at this kind of idea of kind of inclusion in practice, I honestly think everybody in the world should read The Courage of Compassion because it is the most beautiful book that I have ever read. It's, examining the criminal justice system through the lens of, equity and staying out of judgment. This is a public defender who's probably met people who would be seen as being, potentially the most evil in the world through somebody's lens, and how they have been able to stay out of judgment and give them the support that they needed at the time that they needed it. And it really is quite an incredible book. So I think we need more people like that. And I think if anyone could read it, I think they might just walk away with their heart a little bit more full.
That's now as we're talking about learning experience, maybe that's something that I should start doing in terms of not only taking in the books, but also I should ask other guests in terms of, hey, what's a good read. And this is an actual great point, and I like that. So with that, I'll put the book in the show notes, as well as your contact information. And Lisa, I'm so grateful that we had this conversation. I'm happy to be connected with you, even though, like I said, I'm jealous of your travel pics. But but other than that, it was great to have this conversation, and I appreciated all that I've heard and learned from you during our talk.
Thanks very much, Andre. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa. And so with that, we close off on another episode of Global Conversations. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, as well as check out the YouTube channel for past episodes of Global Conversations at Urban Equity 416 on YouTube. Thanks again, and until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.